Over the past few decades, alarm over climate change has fueled global action by politicians, scientists, academics, and activists. And yet beneath the surface, this movement appears to mask its true objective, which is advancing the agenda of a world government. Joining me today on the Endtime Show is Dr. Randal Hallford, Associate Professor of Physical Chemistry at the Center for Theoretical Research, to analyze this prophetic endeavor. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dave Robbins, and I thank you for joining me on this edition of the Endtime Show. And you know, we've talked about this for years, but prophecies foretell a world government to be in power just prior to and at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. And the United Nations is the seat of that world government in the earth today. And on July 23rd, the International Court of Justice, which is the UN's top judicial authority, issued a controversial advisory opinion declaring that governments now have a legal duty under international law to regulate carbon dioxide emissions. And though non-binding, the 500-page decision is expected to heavily influence global climate policy. The International Court of Justice warned that failing to limit greenhouse gases like CO2, ironically dubbed the gas of life, could be viewed as an international wrongful act. While climate activists and global institutions have celebrated the ruling, critics argue it dangerously undermines national sovereignty and opens the door to unelected global bodies dictating domestic policy. Well, from a skeptical perspective, the ruling highlights a deeper concern, and that's that climate policy may be less about protecting the environment and more about establishing centralized global control and using the pretext of a climate emergency to override democratic self-determination. Think of it like this, and this is just one aspect of it, but the New American, they reported that former, and I'm quoting here, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Mary Robinson, the first female president of Ireland and a member of the UN's Elders Group, celebrated the importance of the International Court of Justice opinion. She said, "Today the tables have turned." She said in a statement after the ruling, "The world's highest court provided us with a powerful new tool to protect people from the devastating impacts of the climate crisis and to deliver justice for the harm their emissions have caused." Listen closely. Robinson, who told the New American in an interview in Brazil more than a decade ago that reducing the world's population was an important element to solving climate change, emphasized that governments must comply. So we're talking about world government today, everybody, and what I wanted to do, because obviously I'm not a scientist or a physicist, I have a good friend of ours here at Endtime Ministries joining me today, and it is Dr. Randal Hallford, and he's an associate professor of physical chemistry. Obviously, he's got a PhD, and he's a Center for Theoretical Research, the director for linear science research group. And so today I want to welcome you, Dr. Hallford, to the Endtime Show.
Thanks, Dave. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So everybody, he's going to help me answer all of the scientific questions because I've been wanting to get somebody like this on the program forever. And you know, Dr. Hallford, the reality behind climate data is really more nuanced than mainstream headlines admit. I mean, what's portrayed as scientific consensus often reflects political agendas. They say the science is settled, but it's only because they're wanting to push their agendas. So while many scientists attribute climate change to human activities and greenhouse gas emissions like carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, these global bodies like the United Nations and the IPCC, which would be the International Panel on Climate Change, they push sweeping policies changes based on this contested narrative. So what it is, it's using fear tactics to gain control. They warn that if this continues unchecked, that the planet could experience rising sea levels and increased rain and snowfall, more damaging wildfires and heat waves. So on one hand, it's snowfall. On the other hand, it's heat waves, health risk, droughts, hurricanes, declining fresh water supplies, floods that will threaten our infrastructure, agriculture, transportation, and air quality. So, Dr. Hallford, my first question, and you know, we've talked about these things, but my first question could almost answer everything else. So my first question to you, my friend, is man-made global warming, which leads to climate change, which is what we're being sold in the news, is that real?
No. The first statement that I would reject is man-made climate change. There is no data that supports that industrialized activity has contributed to the temperature or the concentration of heat on the surface of the earth. A couple of important points that you have to make clear when you make statements in general to the public is most of the time people don't reference the data. They don't actually take a look at how scientific investigation change. A couple of big sweeping ideas. The first big idea is that the main components of our atmosphere are nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and water. Mm-hmm. These make up 99.95% of the atmosphere. The remaining 0.5% is made up of what they call greenhouse gases. But as a thermodynamicist, I have to tell you that all of the effects of greenhouse gases as labeled by the UN and by the IPCC and many others, is entirely overcome by water. A couple of key points about water is that it has the highest heat capacity of any substance that's on the earth. It is 1,000 times better at holding heat and absorbing heat than any other substance, whether it's a vapor or liquid. There's 300,000 tons of water right above the surface of the earth for every cubic mile. And so if you're going to consider carbon dioxide as a threat, there are a couple of real negative things about that. First of all, carbon dioxide is essential. If we remove carbon dioxide to any extent, plants are going to suffer. We're actually starving for carbon dioxide right now. If we look back 1,000 years, we were in a period of time where we had just come out of a little ice age, and we had become warmer. The Middle Ages heated up, but the CO2 levels did not change during that whole time. What did change was the Earth's orbital mechanics. The tilt of the Earth is constantly changing, and we're about 4,500 years through a 9,000-year cycle of tilt. As the Earth's tilt changes, called the climate angle, the amount of sunlight in the areas of the Earth where humanity populates the greatest amount begins to see a shift in the weather patterns. And so climate changes largely from two components. The first one is solar activity. There's clear data that shows a direct correlation with solar activity. The process of fusion produces muons. Muons are a particle that come from the sun, and when they strike our atmosphere, they seed the production of clouds. Cloud cover, of course, does two things. It holds heat near the surface of the Earth and blocks sunlight. And so cloud cover is directly correlated with the temperature of the Earth. That's a solar effect. The other major effect is that 99% of the carbon dioxide on our planet is held in surface water, in oceans, lakes, and streams. And there's a physical law called Henry's Law. You can look this up easily in a high school science book or on the internet. Henry's Law talks about how solvents like water have an ability to hold dissolved gases like CO2 and oxygen. But as the temperature increases, they release that gas. They can't hold it as well. And so the Earth breathes CO2 and oxygen out of our oceans as the sunlight waxes and wanes. So the equilibrium of CO2 in our atmosphere will never be touched by any activity that humans can come up with. We cannot add enough CO2 to improve our situation. We can't remove any significant amount of CO2 to improve our situation as far as the atmosphere is concerned. The equilibrium of the Earth is too great. We'll never be able to overcome that. What I would like to speak to in your comment also about flooding and water rise, that is complete myth. First of all, the North Pole is covered in ice, but that's floating. It's already caused the ocean height that we see today. If it all melted, the height of the ocean would not change at all. The depth of water along every shoreline would not change. On the South Pole, the Antarctic, about a Texas-sized patch of ice is already floating in the ocean down there, and the remaining amount that's on a landmass literally would melt away into the atmosphere as a majority. It would create some lakes and streams in the Antarctic, and a small percentage would enter the ocean. A larger concern about ocean depth comes from the expansion of the Earth's equator. It's actually causing most of the changes we see. And just as a note, the Earth's oceans have risen over the last 6,000 years about 20 centimeters. So there's not a lot of change in ocean depth. we see much more damage from a tsunami, as we have recently with the Russian earthquake. But these are temporary, and it's also true that some island masses are sinking. And like anyone getting into a bathtub, water levels will change temporarily. But the Earth is expanding around the equator, some islands are sinking, and so water levels increase occasionally by a very small amount from that action. And the last issue I'd like to bring up, if we are going to make carbon dioxide illegal and the practice of producing it illegal, we're literally going to decimate life. The ocean life will be fine because the ocean holds lots of oxygen and CO2. The flora and fauna of the ocean will get along just fine without us. But if we try to diminish CO2 in any way, beyond even industrial output, we will severely damage the production of food. In the last decade, we have seen an increase in food production worldwide simply because CO2 gases are beginning to approach normal levels again. A few thousand years ago, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 is about 1,000 parts per million. Today, it's about 400. So we're literally behind in the amount of CO2 we have in the atmosphere. So in order for me to answer your question or to respond to your statement, no, CO2 is not a component of global warming. No, it's not a toxic gas. We flood greenhouses to keep plants alive. And no, water rising from melting ice because the planet's climate is changing is not a threat to humanity, not historically. Over the last 6,000 years, the water levels have been fairly constant. And so what I think we might look to is scientific data which tells us, it allows us to predict how the climate will change in the future because of the orbits of the Earth and the planets. For instance, 1999 saw the warmest temperatures we've had in a decade. It turns out that Jupiter, which is a moon of the sun, disturbs the sun's output the same way that the moon disturbs the Earth's ocean levels. And so we saw, coincident with Jupiter's alignment for the beginning of its highest speed around the sun, an increase in activity which produced climate change, warming. But the temperatures have dropped by nearly a degree worldwide on average since that time. And so we don't see a trend of constant heating increasing. What we will see is something predictive from the orbital mechanics of the Earth and the sun. Lastly, and I'm just going to interject this as a citizen of the United States, a lot of the things that we read in the United Nations plans, including reducing human population and making it illegal to use plant life without oversight, follows other religious and cultural tendencies of third world countries. It's certainly not ideas here. And so I would say there is no consensus among scientists about this. First and foremost, you're not going to hear from scientists. We have committees, we publish papers. Public generally doesn't get what we're saying in those papers because they're all very mathematical. But I would say this, just in the last few weeks, the director of the Climate Change Commission in the United States, in a television interview, claimed that the global warming due to carbon dioxide is a hoax. And so that just points up the fact that there isn't any consensus. Many scientists, many of my colleagues, simply laugh in derision at the conclusions that our governments are drawing from what we suppose was scientific data, what they suppose is a way to change things according to their agenda.
Yeah. So so that brings up a million questions for me because I'm in the news every day and I'm reading this propaganda, and I'm glad I've got you on the air today because you've answered several for me. But I want to make sure that we bring our audience in on this and make sure we're all thinking the same thing here. So you're saying that with all of the diesel-powered SUVs and the the carbon-fired power plants and all these the coal-fired power plants and everything, that CO2 is rising. You said we're coming back into our normal level. Years ago, it was 1,000 parts per million. Now it's about 400, but that's rising. But you said temperature's not rising. So what we're being sold is that we're putting off so much carbon emission that it's raising the temperature of the earth and it's going to burn everything up and all that. But you're saying that's absolutely not necessary, that CO2 doesn't drive up the temperature. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
We always see CO2. That's
okay.
Henry's law.
You broke out on me there. Tell me that again. You said that's correct, and then go again.
Yeah, the CO2 always rises after a temperature increase.
Okay. So that's the thing, is that this whole narrative is built on the fact that we're driving the temperature up by all this, emitting so much of these carbon emissions, but that's absolutely a false narrative, you're saying.
Yes, it's a false narrative.
Okay. Very good. And another thing you said is that the earth breathes. God created the planet to breathe, and that most of the carbon dioxide is stored, did you say, in water, right?
Correct.
Okay, so there's not really anything we could do. I mean, in other words, it was 1,000 parts per million years ago. Now it's 400 and headed up, but we're not driving that. What's driving it going up now?
There are several factors all happening at once.
Mm-hmm.
Orbital mechanics, number one.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be the leading cause of climate change. Again, as I said before, there is something called the climate angle in the Earth's tilt.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 9,000-year cycle. We're 4,500 years through that cycle. We're halfway. And so we're going to be seeing changes in climate based on that tilt now going back to apogee.
Mm-hmm.
So it's expected that temperatures will change. What's driving it on the surface of the Earth is cloud cover, solar impact on surface water. We have added, one of my colleagues at Harvard, an astrophysicist, calculated the effect of industrialized CO2 production. And the result of that effect is less than 0.01% over 100 years. And that's just local CO2.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that as a piece of data is local vegetation will rapidly change that concentration. So we don't get our oxygen from trees. We don't absorb CO2 with trees. We could eliminate all plant life on the Earth, and the CO2 levels wouldn't change drastically. That's driven by solar activity, the Earth's orbital mechanics around the sun,
mm-hmm.
and by the temperature at the surface of the Earth, which is controlled by cloud cover. And so we have oceanographic events that occur like El Nino and La Nina. These change the temperature of water and rapidly fluctuate CO2. But Henry's law holds. The temperature must go up before we see CO2 rising. So if you would look at geology for a few minutes, you would notice something in our past, about 800 BC, or AD rather, mm-hmm. something called the Younger Dryas period, which was a glaciation period. It's a very, very cold time. So the CO2 levels began to drop. It takes about 150 to 500 years for temperature to fluctuate CO2 down. It takes a long time to absorb it, especially because most of the water is ice. So ice does not absorb gas as well. So as the ice melts, CO2 absorption continues, and as the temperature of the Earth rises, CO2 absorption slows. So since we've been warming up somewhere around 1780, there was the ending of that cold snap. In England, the Thames River froze solid every winter. But after 1780, that didn't happen again, hasn't happened since then. And so the driver of CO2 and temperature is a culmination of these astrophysical properties and the basic chemical nature of planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. So this is one thing want to make sure everybody gets, is that temperature rises and CO2 follows.
That's correct.
It's not CO2 going up and then the temperature goes up. So that we're being told by the United Nations that the Industrial Revolution is, because there's so many more coal-fired power plants and things like that, and automobiles and everything, that we humans are driving up the temperature. But that simply is an absolute false narrative.
That's correct.
Yes. And they're using that for fear tactics, saying we want to control everything you do because you're going to burn the planet up. And that is so key, and that you explain that perfectly. And the next thing I wanted to ask you was, and I'm just going to walk down through my list here because I know this is going to go very quickly. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency under President Trump is pushing to reverse this landmark 2009 declaration that deems CO2 and other greenhouse gases as harmful to the population's health. You made a statement that CO2 is not like a poisonous gas, I think. And so we inhale oxygen, exhale CO2. We would all be dead if it was a poisonous gas, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so President Trump, the Trump administration has looked at this and said, look, this is crazy. And we're gonna completely move off of this. We're gonna overturn all these regulations and everything that's based on this, because these greenhouse gases are simply not harmful to people's health, right?
That's correct. NASA did studies on this early in the space program for obvious reasons. And they discovered that at 1,000 parts per million, there would be no effects at all on a human in a space capsule. It's only when it approaches 2,000 parts per million that it can become toxic to the normal metabolism of a human being. And I would point out that it's never been 2,000 parts per million, as far as we can tell, on the surface of the Earth. So there isn't really some kind of threat involved in this.
Yeah.
What would happen, however, is that at 1,000 parts per million, we'd be producing about 70% more food, because plants would grow 70 to 75% faster. Carbon dioxide is what they build their tissues out of. And so if we try to thwart CO2 from rising to a sufficient level, like I said, it's low because we're 1,000 years out of an ice age. And so if we try to thwart that, we're really hurting the ability to feed people.
Yes.
And as far as population is concerned, it's declining. Every country's in trouble right now because of low birth rates. So we don't have to do anything to change the population. It takes care of itself. We don't have to do anything to help the Earth. Its equilibrium takes care of itself. It was built to take care of itself.
Absolutely.
With us in mind, I might add.
Yeah.
And so you can't really rationalize the arguments used by the United Nations, except that, in my opinion, I've seen these things before. I've seen it with the Nazis. I've seen it with Marxist countries. This is propagandizing because it has no scientific basis. But as Gödel said, if you tell the lie and you tell it big and you tell it often, people will believe it.
Amen. Well, everybody, I hope you're getting all of this, because this is just fabulous information, and talking about the propaganda coming out from the United Nations to try to control everybody through they say, human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change, which we're learning in very detailed fashion that it is absolutely a false narrative. So we'll do more of a deep dive into this on the backside of the break.
A reminder of the breaking news this hour. At least 22 people are reported to have died in a strike in Gaza.
The rise of Islam.
We're trying to bring answers for so many families desperately.
Is the Israel-Hamas-Iran conflict World War III? So let's talk about the four horsemen. What do these horses symbolize? These are the four spirits of the heavens which go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. In the end time, the true people of God will not be weak, anemic, and defeated. These prophesied events are revealing we are quickly approaching the time of the Great Tribulation right now.
Now streaming on OnlySource and available to order at endtime.com/green. Go to endtime.com/green or call 800-ENDTIME.
What if you could understand Bible prophecy? Dave Robbins, the host of the Endtime Show's TV and radio programs, is holding a free prophecy conference near you. Gain peace and understanding about what the Bible says concerning end-time prophecy. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com/events to see when Dave will be in a location near you.
Welcome back, everybody, and I'm joined with my great friend, Dr. Randal Hallford. He's an associate professor of physical chemistry, Center for Theoretical Research, and he's director of Nonlinear Science Research Group. And so thank you, Dr. Hallford, for joining me today, and so much valuable information. And so what you're saying is, I mean, we're being told every day that we've got to eliminate fossil fuels. And number one, can you define a fossil fuel?
Well, fossil fuels are is kind of a misnomer. It was assumed early in the history of science that fossils decay under intense pressure underground would produce oil, coal, peat moss. These were pressure inside changes chemically. But in modern times, we know that's not true. Fossil fuels are essentially what we would call carbon, like crude oil, coal, natural gas. These are fossil fuels.
Okay, so you said they're carbon what?
Carbon-based.
Carbon-based, okay. Now, so to what we're being fed by the United Nations and the news media and things like that is that these fossil fuels, we're turning them into diesel-powered, vehicles and SUVs and machinery and coal-fired power plants and the fossil fuels. We've covered this, but they put off carbon emissions, and that's driving the temperature. But that simply is not the case. But I want to make sure everybody knows that when they hear about fossil fuels, that we should eliminate them. That simply is that's just propaganda. You're saying we actually need more of that to feed the plant life on the earth, and because you said we're starving the planet for carbon dioxide, we need actually more of these things, not less.
That's correct.
Okay.
There are a couple of other major problems with shutting down oil production and gas production. Most people aren't aware, but modern medicine relies on crude oil. 99% of all pharmaceuticals produced today come from oil stocks. If we were to terminate the use of oil to any degree, and we've seen this in the last 12 years in the United States, pharmaceutical companies would be hard-pressed to produce enough medicine to keep us going. We're 30 days away from running out of all the major types of pharmaceuticals. And if we cut off oil production, not only will those become more limited, but the cost of producing them would become astronomical.
Wow. I
yeah.
did not know that.
The second problem, eliminating fossil fuels, is a thermodynamic one. And I feel professionally I'm able to address this directly. There are laws of thermodynamics, undeniable. There are no caveats, there are no ways around these. The best efficiencies that we can get in using energy as a source of power is at the source. So we put fuel in our vehicles and the engine burns the fuel at the source of power production. This is where efficiency can exist. We can get up to about 35% efficient, theoretically, if we could build it out of strong enough materials. The higher the temperature, the more efficient. The problem with not using fossil fuels is, number one, how are you going to produce electricity? There are very limited nuclear power plants and dams. Wind and solar cannot cover the capacity that's required to keep a country mobile. We couldn't have any shipping. We wouldn't have submarines. We wouldn't have aircraft. So here's the breakdown. Batteries are 12% efficient. That's the best we've been able to do. And those are literally bombs. Modern shipping companies will not transport electric vehicles with these batteries because their ships are getting blown up in the ocean. And when they get wet, they catch on fire. And it takes a tremendous amount of mining, creating toxic metals in our environment to produce these electric vehicles. But a gasoline engine combusts fairly efficiently, about 20% for the modern vehicle. If we start to produce electricity from wind and solar, that's about 20% efficient. That's 15% loss. But then we have to store that electricity in batteries. That's another 70% loss. And so by the time we get electricity to our vehicle, we're talking about 2% of the amount of energy it took to create that. The most inefficient way to run anything would be to use green energy.
Wow.
And so we can't really consider what would happen to society if we lowered or stopped production of oils, fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. Consider, for instance, plastic. The majority of material produced in the United States to containerize objects is plastic. The vast majority of aircraft, spacecraft, ships, and vehicles is plastic. So many things we use in health are plastic. If we stop oil production, that all goes away. The clothes you're wearing, made from plastic. That plastic is made from oil. And so we would go back to wearing cotton for everything, or silk. We wouldn't have, I mean, nature cannot produce enough medicines to treat the people we have. And so it would be catastrophic.
Yeah. Yeah, so somebody hasn't done their research by saying we need to, eliminate fossil fuels. One thing I want to make sure everybody gets, because this was shocking to me, I didn't know that 99% of our medicines is produced from oil.
Yes.
And so if we did away with fossil fuels, there goes our medicine. Yes. Wow. That is shocking to me. So it's pure propaganda. And man, yeah. I just didn't know that. That's shocking to me. Man, I want to talk about, because I read articles everywhere about that, and that, the Biden administration and all the liberals are saying let's do away with fossil fuels, but we would actually, and you said that fossil fuels, carbon emissions, if we stop that, then all the plants would die.
Well, if we prevented it totally, yes.
Yes. Wow. Okay.
It certainly would reduce food production on a massive scale.
Yeah, so we'd basically be killing ourselves if we stopped.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's hey, then now here's the deal. They're talking about decreasing the surplus population. Maybe they want to do this. Maybe they have a way to continue with that and to sustain, but yet the main population, they were saying maybe we'd lose some of them, and I think some of them are wanting to do that because the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. One of the reasons for that is that we're not leaving enough resources for the future generations. It's not sustainable. That's why they're wanting us to start eating bugs and all this other stuff. But we'll get into the food stuff here in just a minute. I want to, but because I knew this was going to go quick. I want to make sure that we touch on the socialistic part of this, because you said something about this reminds me of socialism, communism, maybe in Germany and Russia and China and different places. But I know that the United Nations, it was established to be a socialistic, communistic, one world governing body. Alger Hiss was the architect of the charter that wrote that. He was a communist spy, and that Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General of the United Nations, was the #1 socialist on the planet when he was the president of the Socialist International from 95 to 99. Now he's the Secretary General of the United Nations. So much propaganda that comes out of the United Nations is socialism. Well, all of this environmentalism and the human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change, and we've got to tax all these developed nations to give to the underdeveloped nations. It's all about wealth redistribution at the end of the day, which is the major plank of socialism, wealth redistribution. And so I wondered maybe if you could speak to that. I mean, I can speak to it, but from a scientist perspective, you said something to me the other day when we were upstairs when you came in for Pastor Little's program, that it's all about wealth redistribution. Could you speak to that for just a minute?
Yes, sir. Every American knows that more than half the cost of fuel for their car pays state, local, and federal taxes. And we're looking at gas prices now, which are, well, when I was a youngster, gas was 18 cents a gallon. The state got 3 cents, the local county got a penny, and the federal government got about 25 to 30%. The rest of it was the seller. Of course, he had to pay for that, so most of what he paid for that fuel absorbs what he earns. So you're making a gallon. Well, today, gasoline prices are anywhere from $3 to $7 a gallon, in which about 55% of that is taxes. Now consider the Paris Accord. If that were to go into effect in the United States, the lowest price you could expect for gasoline would be $10 to $15 a gallon, if you could get it. This major shift in money is about 2,000% of what we're used to paying in the United States. That money would go to the United Nations. The problem with that flow through the United Nations is we already know that they're corrupt in distributing aid. They're corrupt when they distribute finances to third world countries. That's been in the news for decades. So if this immense amount of wealth winds up in the United Nations, there's no oversight for how that money will be spent. There's no control by anyone except the United Nations. They would be de facto a world government.
Yeah, so that's the goal in all of this, is that they're trying to establish a world governing body, which, of course, the Bible prophesies will be in power at the time of the soon return of Jesus Christ. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's all about wealth redistribution, and the Bible actually tells us it's going to be a red seven-headed, ten-horned beast, or a socialistic or a communistic one world governing body. And so they're now calling for developed countries to pay reparations to underdeveloped countries, and they consider, get this, they consider China an underdeveloped nation.
Right.
And we're developed, and so they're wanting us to pay into China's coffers, which is just insanity. But they're saying because, go ahead.
China produces more carbon dioxide than
Exactly.
anybody else except the United States and Russia.
Right.
I mean, Russia and the U.S. combined greater than China's output.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so we got one more segment left, everybody, and you can tell Dr. Hallford is just a wealth of information, and we're actually going to go deeper into this a little bit when we get back on the break. I'm going to do some quotes, some different things, but man, I mean, they're establishing a world governing body right now, and we are all living through it. This is going to happen right here in the end times. So Dr. Hallford is helping me to prove that. Many people argue America is not mentioned in the prophecies of the Bible. But they will miss so much about the coming events that will happen in the end time if they don't get that understanding. What do these beasts symbolize? That's what we need to answer. Because if we can't understand what these beasts symbolize, there's no point in even studying this, right? If you don't believe that America is mentioned in the Bible, you're going to be stuck when it comes to figuring out all these prophecies. But once you understand this, America has a prophesied future. It's given to us in the Bible. And the America will not be part of the world government, but we're going to be protecting Israel against the world government all the way to the second coming of Jesus Christ.
Now streaming on OnlySource and available to order at endtime.com/America. Go to endtime.com/America or call 1-800-ENDTIME.
Welcome back, everybody, and I'm joined with Dr. Hallford, and he is the Associate Professor of Physical Chemistry, Center for Theoretical Research, Director of Nonlinear Science and Research Group, and what a wealth of information, and certainly opening my eyes to a lot of this. But the Gatestone Institute reports this: the answer to the earth burning up, and I'm quoting, the answer to the earth burning up was supplied as early as 2015 by Christina Figueres. Now, she's talking about the propaganda. She's telling it right open. Executive Secretary of the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change, she said, this is the first time in history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution. And what she's saying here is that would mean the destruction of capitalism and the world economy as we know it, however long that takes. And then she continued on by saying that will not happen overnight, and it will not happen at a single conference or at climate change, one of the COPs, the Conference of Parties meetings. She said, you choose the number, but and I'm quoting, she said, it does not occur like that. It is a process because of the depth of the transformation. So they're telling us right up front, this is about wealth redistribution, transforming us off of a capitalistic society. The globalists are just galling because they can't control the economies of the world and things like that like they want to, and each and every individual. And they want to move off a capitalistic system and move on to a socialistic system where wealth is redistributed and basically the elites are getting richer. So that's really the goal of all this. They're trying to create a world governing body. So in the time that we have left, we've got about maybe 12 minutes or so here, Dr. Hallford. I wanted to talk about food because according to the United Nations, they say roughly 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions attributed to human activity are tied to the food systems. Now, I know they're trying to just control everything, so they've got to keep everybody in fear mode. And that's what's going on here. So I'm going to read that again because I want you to respond. According to the UN, roughly 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to human activity, and that's tied to our food systems. And they highlight that agriculture and land use, such as methane from livestock, nitrous oxide from fertilizers, CO2 from deforestation, and other emissions from rice farming, manure, and fuel use, are key contributors. They say this is about 1/3 of all of greenhouse gas emissions. Do you agree, Dr. Hallford?
No.
Okay.
First of all of those agricultural things are about absorbing CO2. The nitro that the NOx is given off by any human process rapidly react in the atmosphere. They don't accumulate. I teach atmospheric chemistry regularly, and I can tell you that substances like freons, they persist. They can become a problem. We don't want those to accumulate. Chlorine and bromine, those are not gases we want to accumulate. And it's true that using fossil fuel causes pollution, but those are temperature changing events. As far as methane is concerned, it's smaller a problem in our atmosphere for heating. It doesn't contribute to heating at all. To say that 1/3 of CO2 production is by these activities is ridiculous. Again, the statistic that we've found through scientific research, Harvard University astrophysicist, I cannot remember her name, I apologize, 0.01% over 100 years in industrialized worlds has contributed to temperature, which means that it's from all sources. Heat produced by production itself, smokestack temperatures themselves. It's not just CO2, it's just heat. So the contribution of CO2 by humans is minuscule. The overwhelming capacity of the Earth to produce CO2 from oceans and surface water makes anything that we do of no effect. Here's an example. If you were to remove, I've done this calculation, if you were to remove all plant life from the surface of the Earth, the concentration of oxygen and CO2 would not change, because all of those gases predominantly come from water.
Right.
So plants are local. They take care of your backyard. They're in states with large amounts of plants, have higher humidity, temperatures are higher because there's more moisture. States, parts of the country without plants have very dry, low moisture levels, right? So when I was a kid growing up in California, we would go to the high desert and it'd be 130 degrees at noon, but about midnight it was 35 degrees. There was simply no moisture in the air to hold heat. It all radiated into space. But if you lived in Missouri, I worked on a dairy farm in Missouri for a number of years, and the temperature variation was much larger. It would go from -20 to 95 degrees, but the humidity was never below 70%. So it was you sweated profusely. It makes a big difference in the amount of water in the air.
Yes.
But it has very little effect on the amount of gases in the air. Plants do absorb CO2, and they do give off oxygen. And if you have plants in your house, you could expect some typical variation in those. But as far as the atmosphere in general, humanity can't produce enough CO2 to permanently change the concentration. If we made too much CO2, the oceans would simply absorb more.
Wow. That's such a key statement. Humans cannot produce enough CO2 to really make a change in any of this.
No.
Wow. Man, somebody needs to tell that to the United Nations and the IPCC board.
Well, one comment. The IPCC is made up of 2,000 members, none of which are physical scientists.
Wow. Yeah, so I mean that's the thing. It's just really guys who are on a they make up these big board just to be bought and paid for spokesmen, really, to put out these different agendas and set these things and try to control people. I mean, that's what this is all based on. It's not. I mean, they'll go out and do ice core samples and all these other different things, but they're really not putting out real science. I mean, real data and different things. They can't because it's
No.
propaganda.
Right. Real science is too difficult to explain. It doesn't make a good story.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's very true. Man. Okay, I'm going to have you back on because we're running out of time here. So really quickly, they say in pursuit of net zero emissions, these agencies suggest dramatic changes in how and what we eat. Animal-based foods, particularly red meat, dairy, and farmed seafood, are singled out as major environmental offenders with applied pressure to eliminate drastic and reduce their consumption. In other words, they're saying we need to eat, obviously, insects and chemical-produced food so that it's sustainable. But what do you say to that?
The opposite is true. This is really part of the same story.
Yeah.
If you will notice, the things that they're targeting are the things that keep people alive.
Mm-hmm.
They're things that are sustainable and replaceable. Chemically produced foods are not sustainable. They're not replaceable. You need more oil to contribute to that. You need to, and we've seen in the United States the disaster that chemical products in our foods have caused. Mm-hmm. So many people can no longer eat normally because these chemicals have destroyed their digestive systems. I have had that happen to me. I have a very restricted diet. It's not a good idea to get away from what man was created to eat.
Amen.
We are primarily carnivores.
Amen.
Plant life is a secondary source of food. Primarily, fish and fowl were originally the vast majority of foods for humans for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until agriculture became significant with a rising population that grains became part of the picture. And the problem with that is that we have so genetically modified our grains in the United States to eliminate proteins and build up starches that it's really not nutrition in that sense of the
Yes.
word. So if you want people to eat less food, they need to eat meats.
Right.
They need to eat fish. They need to eat fowl. Anybody who's ever experimented with their diet knows that eating a vegetarian diet means you're going to eat a lot more of it.
Right.
It seems to me that they're targeting everything that easily can be found
Yes.
to sustain life.
That's the key. It's just to control everything. Really quick, I know that you are a pastor as well. I want everybody to know that. And I want you to comment very quickly that a lot of times people take the God factor out of all of this. But the Bible says in Genesis chapter 8, verse 22, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, the cold and heat, and the summer and the winter, and day and night shall not cease. Dr. Hallford, do you think that human-induced global warming is going to burn up the planet with God involved?
Absolutely not.
Amen. And that's the key. We can't take the God factor out of all of this.
And that's what started it all.
Well, that's the whole thing. And the thing is, though, is that the United Nations, this total humanitarian organization, and they're into fear factor. But when you understand the Bible and you know what's coming and things like that, and you've got God in your life, you don't have to really worry about all of this. The thing I don't like about it is I've sat here and have to watch this propaganda come across my desk every day because I'm in the news, and I'm thinking, if everybody just understood this was propaganda and just said no. Thankfully, we have a president in the White House that is cutting all these regulations that took us out of the Paris Climate Agreement, a lot of these different things, and he's kind of lopping off the tentacles, and hopefully that will, we can keep that going rather than, going back into maybe the previous administration and that type of situation, which was just pushing us off headlong into a world government, which is what they're wanting. He was a globalist, and so we were going right along with the globalist agenda. But man, I knew this was going to go quick, and I want to thank you, Dr. Hallford, for your time. It just proved everything I knew, but I didn't know how to say it from a scientific, vocabulary like you have and all of the knowledge you have. There's probably a million more things that you could say, but I do want to thank you for joining us today, and what a wealth of information you have been. You got about 45 seconds. Any closing remarks?
Yeah, I would say from my history in the United States, I have seen people survive terrible, terrible times because they could find food.
Amen.
It was possible. What we see happening to us is much like the stories of Robin Hood. Everybody's taking away our ability to find things we need to survive. But I believe that God is going to make a way,
amen,
for everyone who needs to survive. God is the provider. We need our trust in him,
amen,
not in the nations.
Amen. Well, God bless you, my friend. And I do thank you for joining me today on the interview. What a wealth of information. And look forward to having future conversations with you on programs coming up. God bless.
Thank you.